down here.
All right. Sure. Good morning, everyone. Lance Tarchioni, technical agronomist with DeKalb Agro in West Central Illinois, here with you on Ask the Agronomist on a wet but not raining and sunny Thursday morning. Appreciate you joining. We will be covering probably a lot of topics today related to the weather, to ponding, to saturated soils, to impact on crops, and talk a little bit about herbicide issues and whatever else comes up. Probably first thing I want to call out, if you remember from previous episodes, that if you log in on YouTube with either your YouTube account or a Gmail account, you can use the live chat feature on YouTube and chat questions in live via text. So always encourage lots of questions. That's kind of, to me, what makes Ask the Agronomist special, is we get lots of questions and feedback from you. And we will always give those questions preferential treatment and get them taken care of live here in the episode. If you're uncomfortable logging into YouTube or don't want to mess with that, a couple options back here. My phone number, you can text me a question. Now, we may not get that one live because it's hard for me to monitor my phone while we're live. And here's my email address. Same thing. You can email questions to me, and we'll always address those in the following episode if we're not able to get those addressed here live. You can also, it's a good chance that your FSR might perhaps be watching the broadcast, and maybe you can text a question to your FSR and they can live chat it in so that we can get that question answered. So anyway, we'll get stuff kicked off here this morning. Obviously, we've had a lot of moisture across the territory. According to my climate account, which has been impressively accurate on my rains as of late, I've logged about 3.2 inches at home since Saturday afternoon. And I've talked to people that have had as little as 1.5 inches, is about the least amount that I've heard anywhere across West Central Illinois, up to 4+. So there's lots of areas. I see producer Adam had a 5 held up on his hand. So I don't know where the 5 was. At your house, Adam, or just in the territory?
Yeah, down around the Kinderhook area.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, everybody, the first inch was a wonderful blessing. The second inch was okay. After that, we kind of start to get into some issues. I know I was looking at some of our acres in southern Warren County last night, and kind of dismayed at the size of our lakes. But our lakes aren't really any bigger than the neighbors' lakes, so everybody's kind of dealing with that. I was driving to Lincoln yesterday for a dealer, towards Lincoln for a dealer meeting, and it was windy, and there was actually some whitecaps out on the lakes, out on the field. So kind of a sad sight to see when we had all these beautiful stands, and you see that nice, pretty green corn disappear into the water, and then on the other side of the lake, you see it reappear down through the field, and getting lots of questions about what's the impact of that. How's that stuff going to do? So as a general rule, if you're dealing with ponding, which a lot of us are, the worst case scenario would be freshly planted corn. Second worst case scenario would be freshly planted beans. So soybeans can hold their breath better than corn. Both crops can hold their breath longer in cool conditions than in warm conditions. So we're about to get really warm for the rest of this week. Be some of probably the warmest weather we've had this spring. And, crops can survive for several days submerged in an oxygen depleted environment if it's really cool. If we're, 85, 90 degrees and the water's warm and the soil's warm, which it's going to take a while for the soil and water to get warm, as cool as we've been. So even though the air temperature's, 88 degrees, that soil is going to warm up more slowly. But if you're trying to survive in an oxygen depleted environment, cool is better than warm. Emerged crops will take it better than crops that hadn't come up yet. So if you're in an area that was a little bit later planted and just had some acres that got planted prior to receiving 3 or 4 inches of rain, the thing you have to consider is that no growth will occur in a saturated soil. So with the absence of oxygen, that seedling can't grow, the root system can't grow, that seed shoot can't try to emerge. And so until we get the soil dried out enough that we get some oxygen back in the soil, that plant's basically just going to sit there. So we're going to have several days until the water's gone, and then a few more days after the water's gone before we've got enough oxygen in that soil that those plants are able to resume growth. How long they can survive is going to depend on, the size of the crop and, temperature to a certain extent and other conditions. If the water's gone in a couple days, probably be okay. After that, it's just going to depend on the circumstance. So absolutely, we're going to have some spotting into doing some ponds at the very least. If you've got crops that haven't emerged yet, potential for crusting is a concern. We've got that soil wet and saturated. We're going to get really hot really fast, probably dry that surface out. And when that surface dries fast and gets kind of baked in the hot sun, how thick or hard of a crust are we going to develop on that soil? And, these plants are probably not going to be able to grow fast enough to emerge before that soil gets hard. So I think most of the forecasts have got chances of rain starting again about next Tuesday. And even though we need to get back in the field, we need to get these soils dried out, we need to be able to make herbicide applications, we need to finish planting, we need to replant in some cases. We're not really going to need rain next Tuesday unless it's to alleviate a crust that has developed. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. But it is frustrating to have the excess moisture probably in July and August. We're going to wish we had some of this moisture back. The rains that I had at my place were beautiful. I mean, I basically had 3 separate rain events separated by 12 to 24 hours in between of about an inch each time. I mean, it was beautiful rain. I didn't have anything that was a hard rain. It was just more than the soil can hold. So there was a lot of runoff, even though it didn't come that hard. Spoon River's out pretty good when I crossed it this morning. So, even though we didn't necessarily have a hard pounding, 3-inch thunderstorm type rain event, that soil is just so saturated that we still had quite a bit of runoff. And, we're better off to plant dry and get wet than we are to plant wet and get dry. But, it is a little bit frustrating to look at the lakes and look at the ponds, and, stands are really quite good in a lot of fields, and pretty pleased with the emergence that we've seen from most of our corn and soybean fields. There's a good stand there underneath the pond, and hopefully the pond gets away in time that, we don't do as much replanting as maybe it might look like to you as you drive past your fields this morning. So one thing I do want to call out, I had a request from a good customer to give a shout out to flagging soybean fields. So we're getting close to that time when we're going to be making post-emergence applications. It looks like the post-emergent spray season is going to get condensed by Mother Nature, which is typical. There really haven't been any post-emergence applications made yet. And, every acre of corn and every acre of beans that got planted early is going to be ready for that post trip at about the same time. So for those of you in the retail application business that were frustrated by how challenging it is to make pre-emergent applications when people are planting corn and beans at the same time, and we got all these early planted beans we need to manage, well, that post-emergence application season, will be, potentially compressed and challenging as well. But, some of the local farm bureaus, I know in this case, Warren Henderson County Farm Bureau is making flags available to farmers. If you want to put a Extend Flex flag in your Extend Flex field, if you want to put an Enlist flag in your Enlist field, if you're raising conventional beans and you want a conventional flag for your non-traded beans, I do think that, good communication, good record keeping, making sure that what you intended to get planted in a field is actually what got planted there. And here over the next couple weeks before we're in the heat of those post-emergent soybean applications, would be a really good idea for everybody to sit down with your applicator, make sure that everybody knows what you've got planted in a particular field, talk to the neighbors, find out what they've got in their fields. It has the potential to be kind of a wild and crazy summer from a herbicide standpoint. You may have heard there are shortages of some chemistry just due to logistical challenges, supply challenges, pandemic related challenges. It's going to be kind of a weird year where you might walk into your dealer and the product that you prepaid, the product that you had planned to use might not be available. And if you end up using something other than what you had intended to use back in December, you want to make sure that everything's cool from a label standpoint and adjacent crop standpoint. And if you're going to end up using more dicamba than maybe you thought you would a couple months ago, let's make sure we're doing that safely, doing that appropriately, and doing that on label. So just wanted to give a reminder about that before that spray season kicks up. And with that, I guess we'll kind of open things up for questions. And Adam, I don't know if anything's been chatted in yet, but what's on your mind this morning?
So with all the rain that we've had and with some of the herbicide residuals that we've had out there, the question, how effective are my residuals now that we keep having these rains and some of these temperature fluctuations? We've been cool, generally speaking, going to be warming up. How is all that going to interact with our weed species we're trying to control out there?
Right. So obviously, a lot of layers to that onion, and that makes me think of some other questions that have come up relative to pre-emergence herbicides and soybeans related to crop response and crop injury that I wanted to get into and spend some time on. So, the effect of temperature and water on a herbicide is, time, temperature, and moisture are really what degrades herbicide in the soil. And we talk about, residual, products having a certain length of residual, and that's kind of an average number. And that average can range widely based on moisture, temperature, when it got activated, how it was applied, was it incorporated, was it not? Did it go on after you planted? Did it go on before you planted? And certain chemistries, like PPO chemistry, for example, and some other chemistries require more moisture for activation than something like a dicamba or an acetochlor or other products do. So your products that require very little water for activation tend to be more water soluble. And so it's a trade-off there. If you've got a product that requires relatively little moisture for activation, that's a product that you're probably going to more quickly lose when you've got excess water. If you've got a product such as PPO chemistry that requires more water for activation, that means they're less water soluble. That means they're going to be more persistent when you have excess moisture. Now, we've had more moisture than is really ideal for any herbicide product, frankly. And, the more moisture you get and the more heat you get, the faster that herbicide is going to break down. The sooner you're going to want to make that post-emergence application so that you've actually got overlapping residuals. So the concept that we promote of overlapping residuals means that you have to get the post-trip on before the pre-application quits working. And that way you don't give those weeds time in the interim in between to emerge from the soil. So we've had, really good conditions to activate herbicides. We've also had conditions to speed the breakdown and decomposition of herbicides. So time, is a factor. Soil temperature is a factor. The cooler soils are, the longer those herbicides will persist. The warmer soils are, the faster they'll break down and the faster the weeds are germinating. The drier soils are, the longer they will persist. I mean, basically the ideal scenario for pre-emergent chemistry is to get enough rain to activate it and then stay, moist, but not excessively wet to extend that residual control as long as you can. So, I mentioned the aspect of crop response from some of our soybean pre-emergent chemistry. Primarily our PPO class of herbicides are the ones that I've been getting the most questions about. Those are our best residual water hemp products. That's why they're very commonly used. That's why we recommend them. That's why we're going to continue to recommend them, even when you see a little more crop response than you would like to. And if you think about it, what we try to do, we want to layer a herbicide. So here's your soil surface. We want to layer a herbicide barrier close to that soil surface. Water hemp especially is a very small seeded weed, and small seeded weeds germinate very well from the surface or the top ½ inch of the soil. So basically that is your zone of emergence or germination for water hemp. So the best thing you can do to control water hemp is have a concentrated layer or zone of herbicide right on the soil surface. Well, what happens when that soybean plant is pushing up through the soil and it's growing slowly in cold, wet soils, and that herbicide's already been activated by that ample moisture that we've had? That soybean's sitting there in that crook, pushing up through that soil slowly, very slowly, very slowly. And if it takes 10 or 15 days for it to grow through that top inch of soil where that herbicide is laying, you're giving that herbicide a lot of opportunity, or giving that plant a lot of opportunity to just continue to absorb that herbicide. And so we've probably got some soybean plants that took up a pretty good slug of herbicide as they were just sitting there trying to push up through that treated soil. Now, if you incorporate that herbicide in the top, say 3 or 4 inches with some tillage, you're going to dilute that layer at the surface, and you'll reduce the potential for herbicide injury. The flip side of that is you're also reducing the potential for weed control, because all that herbicide that you distributed down here isn't going to do a damn thing to control the water hemp that's trying to grow close to the surface. The other thing you can do to improve crop safety or reduce the potential for injury is put that herbicide on 3 or 4 weeks before you plant. But also, that's going to reduce your weed control. So that's not necessarily a great thing either. So it's kind of a balancing act between, injury potential and weed control. And everything you do to strengthen a herbicide to give it the best potential to control weeds, which is why you're using it, is also giving it the best potential to have a negative impact on your crop when we get cold, wet soil conditions. So I, don't really believe that the herbicide is at fault or the seed treatment is at fault. It's primarily the weather, but there are differences between programs. And I am a little bit concerned that, if you went through a lot of crop response in your soybeans, there might be some people that are tempted to switch to, programs that aren't as good a water hemp program, moving away from some of our best water hemp chemistry. So just remember that, weather conditions are going to drive, the potential for injury a lot more than the herbicide program you choose. And there are trade-offs between, weed control efficacy and crop safety. The safest thing from a soybean standpoint would be to not put anything in the soil. But we know that isn't going to work these days with the amount of resistance that we have. We're trying to manage that resistance to a manageable level. So, we know we've already got documented resistance of water hemp to glyphosate, to post-emergence PPOs, to 2,4-D, to group 15 chemistry, and in some cases to HPPD chemistry. So we're trying to, manage that. To make sure that the products that we have today that still work on water hemp continue to work. And that's going to require us to continue to use all the tools in the toolbox. And if you say, I'm not going to use the most effective water hemp tool anymore because I don't like what it did to my beans, that might not be the best decision long term. So Adam, anything else you want to cover relative to the herbicides?
I think, we've seen a little bit of herbicide injury this year on some beans in particular due to the PPOs in particular with the soybean emergence. And I think you kind of just covered that. I guess the questions that I've been getting a lot here lately are twofold. We'll start out with what we've got coming down the pipe, so to speak, in our breeding and what we're bringing to the table as far as our herbicide technologies.
Mm-hmm.
I know the PPOs are a big part of that.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of questions from growers when we talk about what's really changing with that PPO technology that we're bringing forward in the future if we get all the regulatory approvals and everything.
Right. And, it's really exciting to look at the next two really trait launches of soybean weed control systems that we're working on. XtendFlex is a great tool to give us the flexibility to use either dicamba or glufosinate post on soybeans. Our next technology, our next trait stack is going to be what we call HT4, which will actually have 5 herbicide trait technologies in it. So HT4, which, probably middle of this decade is when we're hoping HT4 will be available. And to my knowledge, that will be the first opportunity that a grower has to use either a 2,4-D or a dicamba-based system on the same bean. Those beans will also be resistant to glufosinate, glyphosate, and HPPD chemistry. And so those will be the 5 traits. Now, HT5, which would be the one that Adam was referring to, that's late this decade. So we could be talking 10 years down the road for HT5. So it's exciting to think about. But to get from where we are today to that technology being available to the grower, we have to get a new trait approved, which is a lot of heavy lifting, and we've got to get new chemistry labeled, which is not easy thing to do either. So that technology will add a 6th mode of herbicide resistance into those plants, and that would be trait-based genetic resistance to PPO chemistry. And new chemistry can be developed or is being developed to go along with that technology, because today's PPOs, in spite of the fact that they have the ability to cause crop response and crop injury, you don't need a trait to be safe to use those products. The chemistry that's being developed to go with the HT5 soybean is non-selective PPO chemistry, which that means it kills everything unless you've got the trait. So if you think today's PPO chemistry is hot, you ain't seen nothing yet, because the trait, the product that would go along with HT5 would require the trait to be crop safe. And I think that, to me, we're a long ways away from that, but it would be, think about how nice it would be to be able to apply PPO chemistry pre or post on soybeans. Think about how nice it would be to use products that have really, really, really good control of water hemp, but you don't have to get them on before the soybeans come up. The flexibility that would give us to make our pre-emergent applications, to give us more tools in the toolbox from a residual standpoint and also from a post standpoint, because this new PPO chemistry so far is showing really good efficacy on quote unquote PPO resistant water hemp populations. And so really, really exciting stuff. Wish it was closer to the market. We could use it today. And the trend line we're on with water hemp, if we need it today, I don't really want to imagine how badly we might need it, 8 or 9 or 10 years from today. But that technology is very exciting. In addition to that, Bayer chemistry research folks are continuing to develop new modes of action, new sites of action. We've got products in the pipeline that are what we call selective chemistry, which selective means that it can have crop safety to our crops. Probably isn't going to control every species of weed, but we are, developing new modes of action, new sites of action for water hemp with selective chemistry as well, that has the potential to be in the marketplace probably long before HT5, frankly. So that's just kind of a glimpse into the future. It's fun to talk about. I fear a little bit that if we spend too much time talking about it, long before you're able to buy it, you're going to get tired of us talking about it. So I want to be a little bit careful with that. But there is stuff in the pipeline that will hopefully keep us 1 or 2 or at least half a step ahead of Mother Nature as water hemp continues to be probably one of the biggest weed control challenges we face.
Yeah, that's a great explanation, Lance, and good job there, because that's the thing that people are scratching their heads about when we're talking about some things coming in the future is wait a minute, PPOs, we're using PPOs already. So
Right.
what is that trait being integrated into the crop really going to help us defeat some of the weeds that we're struggling with today? So great explanation. Got a couple of questions coming in about relative maturity changes. In particular, when it comes to replanting into an existing stand, ponding issues, things like that. A lot of good stuff to talk about there. Primarily corn questions is what they've been focused on, but we could also talk about beans too.
Yep. So great questions. That was one thing that I had wanted to cover and assumed somebody would ask about. So appreciate those questions coming in. So yeah, when it gets late, and let's be honest, today's what, the 20th? Is it May 20th already today? So I've got water standing on somewhere on every field that I farm. Somebody needs to invest in some tile in my farming operation. So anyway, it's likely going to be June before we can start to address some of these pond situations. If you've got a well-drained field and the weather straightens around, you may have a May window yet, but we're probably talking about if the Spoon River's on your field right now, or there's a 3-foot deep pond on your field right now, it's probably going to be June before we can try to plant something back into that pond. And it seems like once we turn that calendar into June, people kind of panic, people kind of freak out, people tend to overreact a little bit. You can absolutely plant 115-day corn in June. Now, it scares some people to think about that. Generally speaking, the best thing you can do from an agronomic and yield standpoint is to plant the fullest season product that you can get away with. Now, that you can get away with part is where the gray area comes in, because if you don't have the ability to handle high moisture corn at harvest, or you refuse to handle high moisture corn at harvest, you may want to plant something earlier so that the moisture is not quite so high. I encourage people not to overreact in that situation. So, 110-day-ish maturity products are very, very acceptable to be planting in early June. I'll give an example from my own farm in 2019. We planted 6088, which was a 110-day double pro that was a little bit popular at that time. And that was planted on June 11th, and that came out. And I believe we actually did go ahead and put fungicide on that in the summer. And even with that late planting date and 110-day maturity and the use of fungicide in season, that corn came out at under 20%. A year like 2009, people remember back to that really cold summer in 2009, where we accumulated a lot less heat units than we do in a normal year. I think that summer was a 1 out of 20 or maybe 1 out of 30 kind of summer. So I don't think we need to worry about 2009 kind of summers, because they just might happen once in your or twice in your farming career. But people do still remember that, we just didn't get the heat units. And when you get a cool summer, nothing matures the way we would typically expect it to. It's also very well established that if you've got a 60-day delay in planting, that is not going to cause a 60-day delay in harvest. Things develop faster as you plant them later. We accumulate heat units faster as you plant them later. Some of these crops that have been in the ground for, 7 weeks now, considering their age, aren't that big. It's they haven't necessarily had the ideal growing conditions. And so crop that goes in June, is not going to be as far behind the crop that went in early April as the calendar date might suggest. So what I would encourage you to do is stay the course if you can. So if you've got acres left to plant and you had full season corn planned for those acres, I would stay with that if you can. If you feel like you can't, I would, encourage you to trade that product out for something that's still full season. Don't rush to plant 100-day corn or 105-day corn. That's just not necessary. When you plant really early corn, so I'm going to say 105 and earlier is what I would call really early. that corn really wasn't even bred for Central Illinois. And it sure as heck wasn't bred to plant in June in Central Illinois and be pollinating in late July and August in Central Illinois. So, generally speaking, our full season hybrids that are most adapted to our area is what we want to stay with. If you do need to shift into some earlier stuff, talk to your dealer, talk to your FSR, see what products are available. We do have excellent options in that, 108 to 110 day range if you feel like you need something earlier. If you're going to be spotting in ponds and the idea is not to maximize yield, but to keep the field more uniform from a harvest moisture standpoint. And I get it. If the crop that survived that didn't need to be replanted is 17% moisture and you hit a patch of 25% corn going through the field, it is hard to blend that in. That can affect the performance of your dryer. That can affect storage. And if you want to get that moisture of that replant corn closer to the moisture of the old stand or the original stand, you are going to have to go earlier. I still wouldn't get crazy. I don't think I would. I kind of jokingly tell people, if you're not willing to plant 105-day corn, you need to just plant beans, because going under a 105 typically is not something that I would ever recommend. But if you've got a field of 110-day or 112-day that was planted early, and you're spotting in holes out in that field, you might want to go down to a 105, 106, maybe occasionally a 104 to try to match up that moisture. I think it's going to cost you bushels to do that. And I don't think it would be necessarily a problem if the replant corn's 5 points wetter than the rest of the field. I'd still rather see you put a 108, 110, 112-day hybrid out there instead of something really early, and just let it be wetter. Because there's going to be more bushels there to offset those additional drying charges in most cases. Same thing's true of soybeans. If you're trying to patch in a hole in a soybean field, if you want to early it up a little bit so that the field matures more uniformly, it's arguably a bigger issue in soybeans than it is in corn. I mean, you can chew through 2 acres of 30% corn as you're harvesting your cornfield if you want to. It's hard to chew through, a patch of green beans that haven't matured yet. So, if you want to early up soybeans, I'd say maybe half a maturity group is about as far as I would shift. So if you had a 3.5 to 3.8 in your first planting, maybe a 3.0 to a 3.3, to spot in that hole. If you're replanting the whole field, I would not recommend a 3.0 to a 3.3. I'd rather see you plant a 3.8, 3.9, 4.0, 4.1, something 3.7 or later if you're planting late. If you've still got early beans left to plant, that's not the end of the world. It's not ideal, but that happened to me in 2019. I planted 2 6s on June 11th in 2019. They performed fine. The reason I did it was they were treated, and I wasn't going to be that, that refused to plant the treated beans that I had asked for, prepaid, that had been treated since March, because my dealer did a nice job for me. I wasn't going to be the guy to refuse to plant those. So if you're in that situation, I'd encourage you to plant whatever treated beans that you have purchased. That's a little bit of the reason why, if you like to plant early beans, I like to plant the early beans first. And that way you're not setting with 2 6s in your shed in June if we end up in a late season. So I'd a lot rather you finish up with your 3.9s than your 2 6s. And with soybeans, within reason, the later we get, the fuller season you should plant. And that's why if you talk to people that raise double crop beans in Southern Illinois, they're using early 4s for double crop, and their first crop might have been 3.5s. Or in some cases, even late 2s or early 3s in some areas where they're dabbling with some early beans early. But generally speaking, it's a true statement for both crops that if you're planting late, you want to plant the fullest season product you can, and that will typically maximize your yield potential. There are extenuating circumstances where maybe in a certain situation you want to go earlier, but it's generally not the best thing to do from a yield standpoint.
Yeah, we had an interesting question come in. It kind of kind of revolves around what you're talking about, Lance. So I want to know about 90-day corn, how you feel about planting 90-day corn. But the curveball, which you kind of already talked about some earlier season relative maturity corns and how they fit into our geography. But the curveball in this question is, what do you think about 90-day corn planted after wheat?
Okay. So, if you've got enough growing degree days in a normal summer, and I don't have the chart with me to do the math right here on air for you, but you can look this up yourself. Those resources are out there. If you calculate how many heat units, first thing I'll say is hopefully you can get the wheat cut in June. So the earlier you get the wheat out, the better. It'll make good silage. So if you're thinking of chopping it, I'd say that's probably a better idea than counting on it for a grain harvest. Corn following wheat's kind of a shaky rotation to begin with, let alone planting it that late. But if you do the math on heat unit accumulation from July 1 to first frost date, there's probably enough heat units there to get 105-day corn mature before a freeze, unless we get an early freeze. So the first thing I would say is I don't think you need to go as early as 90. The second thing I would say is, from a rotational standpoint, if you think corn on corn is a harsh environment, try corn following wheat. Your nitrogen availability is going to be about that in that field. So you're going to have to hope for a moist July, August, and September to make sure that you're getting that nitrogen released. You're going to need to use probably more nitrogen than you would like to on that field to make sure that corn crop, even though it won't be a great corn crop, can get the nitrogen that it needs, because that decomposing wheat stubble is the microbes that are breaking that wheat stubble down are going to be highly competitive with that corn for nitrogen in the soil. So if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you're using adequate amount of nitrogen. Get the wheat harvested as soon as you can. Remove the straw if at all possible. So if you're going to bale the straw off, that would help that corn crop. Pray for good moisture in July, August, and September. Pray for a late frost and a nice warm but not too hot summer, because that corn is going to be pollinating in probably mid-late August. And, that's not a good time to be pollinating corn. So can it be done successfully? Absolutely. Is it very risky? Absolutely. Is it better than soybeans? Not in my opinion, unless you're looking for feed. And if you're going to chop it as silage, wouldn't bother me a bit. But if you're hoping to harvest it for grain, I guess my question would be, why would we do corn instead of soybeans in that scenario? So if somebody wants to follow up on their question and straighten me out as to why corn would be a better in your particular scenario, maybe I could follow up more on that. But I would be more in favor of soybeans as a double crop following wheat for multiple reasons. But I've seen it done with corn. It's done with sorghum in certain parts of the country. We don't grow a lot of sorghum around here, but that would probably be my second best thing after soybeans would be sorghum rather than corn, if you had a market for it.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic there, trying to manage both the grass species one after the other. They're both after a lot of the same things, both being grasses. So
Right.
Yeah, it's I would agree that soybean is probably something more interesting to look at in that scenario. But switching gears just a little bit on you here, we've had a couple of questions, and I've had a lot of conversations. I'm sure a lot of other reps have too. A lot of people really interested in fungicides. A lot of prepay fungicide activity going on still.
Yep.
And a lot of questions about fungicides. Had an interesting conversation. You can address fungicide generally speaking. But conversation the other day was, a guy was interested due to his sprayer equipment in trying to put his fungicide on a little bit sooner to get over a little bit shorter crop with his sprayer. And he wanted to know what the efficacy difference might or might not be by going a little bit early versus putting on right there at that brown silk timing where we like to operate.
Right. So great question, and there's a lot of research going on in this particular area of herbicide timing. There's a lot of new chemistry on the market. There's a lot of pre-mixed products with multiple modes of action. A lot of companies are coming out with 2- and 3-way mixtures, and there's a lot of new chemistry in fungicides. And there's, this is probably one of the bigger growth areas, in the chemistry business, is new fungicides, new uses for fungicides, new timings for fungicides. Should we look at multiple applications of fungicides? There's fungicide going out in furrow. There's fungicide going out at that V5, V6 timing, kind of with a post-emergence herbicide. There's a window that's starting to open up for those, what I would call, late post vegetative, fungicide timings. And that might be the particular timing that your customer was asking about. And we've got our traditional VT fungicide timing and that, tassel, silking. I want those done before brown silk myself. There are different schools of thought on that. And then there are situations where people feel they've seen a benefit from even later applications. Unless you're trying to win the NCGA yield contest, you're probably not going to put fungicide on your crop 5 or 6 times. But there are 5 or 6 different timings that are being evaluated for possibly putting fungicide on a crop. Chris Callowell, my colleague, he's done a lot of work with in-furrow fungicides looking at crown rot. We've seen benefits, stalk quality, yield, anthracnose control, other things from V4, V5, V6 applications in corn. We've had Physoderma brown spot, which has become a bigger issue in corn that could probably be alleviated by maybe a V8, V9, V10 timing application in corn. Nobody's really doing that. The challenge with fungicides in corn is, A, they don't last season long, and B, the diseases develop at different times of the season. So just the development cycle of the disease, the particular disease that you're dealing with, is going to change when you need to apply fungicide. So, are you trying to control tar spot? Are you trying to control southern rust? Are you trying to control gray leaf spot? Are you trying to prevent crown rot? Are you trying to control northern corn leaf blight? The answer to those questions for every acre would be yes. I want to prevent those diseases. The challenge is you can't do that necessarily in every case with one application of one product at one timing. And so, to answer your question directly, Adam, I think the predominance of the research that's been done over the years on fungicides, and whether you're talking about plant health benefits from the strobies or whether you're just talking about basic disease control, that VT timing is the sweet spot. I think there's more data out there to support that your best odds of getting the biggest response is sometime between tassel and early brown silk. And that might be a 2-week window, after tassel emergence. And that to me, continues to be the sweet spot. Now, are there products that you can apply earlier than that and still get a benefit? Absolutely. Is the benefit you get from applying that product earlier than that going to be as good, as consistent as maybe applying that product a couple of weeks later? It's going to depend on the product. It's going to depend on the rate to a certain extent. It's going to depend on the season, and it's going to depend on the diseases that you're trying to control. I've seen scenarios where when gray leaf spot comes in early, you might have got a better bang for your buck spraying 2 weeks before tassel. There's been situations where gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight were non-issues. Northern's another one that can come in early. There was a year, I don't remember what year it was, but there was not too many years ago, there was a year where we had a huge amount of northern came in early. And there were probably a lot of acres, if they were planted to a northern susceptible hybrid, that should have had a fungicide application long before tasseling. And if you were in that situation and you use one of those products that you can apply early, it might have looked amazing. But if early northern's not your problem and late southern rust is your problem, that early application is not going to look so good. So you can gameplay different scenarios. And, if you want to spray early, because that's when you can do it, I would say you're better off spraying early than not doing it. But you might be still better off yet to stay at that traditional timing than you are to spray early, just because spraying early is more convenient for your operation. But there's a lot of variables there. Every product has its different strengths and weaknesses from the disease spectrum that they control, and the product you choose matters. The time you apply it matters. In some cases, the product you apply it to matters. And above all, the weather matters a whole bunch, because that's what's going to influence what diseases are prevalent, when those diseases get fired up. I think there's going to be, potentially a bigger benefit to an early season application this year because of the stress and because of the wet weather that we've had. We've had really, really, really good conditions for crown rot infections in corn. And I could see scenarios where, getting some fungicide on that crop at, V4, V5, V6, when you're putting your post-emergence herbicide on, could provide big benefits. I would never recommend doing a V5 instead of a VT. So don't, if you decide to go early with a fungicide, I would treat that as an additional fungicide application, not replacing that traditional VT fungicide. So I'm still a fan of the VT applications. I've certainly seen situations where guys have gone prior to tassel and had very good results, but in most cases, they're putting that product on prior to tassel. They're seeing that corn do well. They're having success with that. There's really nothing out there to compare it to as far as another product in the same field applied 3 weeks later to make that comparison of which way would have been better. It's very hard to do fungicide comparisons in field. If you're spraying with a plane, you're never exactly sure where that line is. And if you're spraying with a ground rig, it's a little easier to do, but it's still kind of a pain. And so it's hard to get those in-field fungicide applications. And you could design quite a trial if you wanted to, where you're looking at different products at different timings, sequential programs where you're using multiple applications of fungicide through the season, and you might use a different product, for each one of those application timings. So, if you've got a high boy sprayer and you like to do plots and you want to take an 80-acre farm and turn it into a fungicide trial, Adam could help you set that up.
Yeah, great explanation. A lot of different things changing in the fungicide world from a product standpoint. I know there's a lot of different companies working on tons of different fungicide formulations to try and almost a lot of it aiming towards that fungicide lasting longer throughout the season,
right.
Almost slow release formulations of fungicide. So probably a lot of stuff coming down the pipe of evolution there as far as fungicides are concerned. But, I always believe that putting a fungicide on at any time is better than not putting it on at all.
Right. So, I would agree with that. And, and the length of control of a fungicide, the chemistry itself, even the longer lasting products, there is no such thing as a fungicide that's going to give you protection season long. Those products are going to give you maybe 10 days of control, 2 weeks of control. A long lasting fungicide might give you 3 weeks of control. The reason it appears as though we get full season protection is because you break that disease cycle, you prevent the disease from developing, and then if you're lucky, after the fungicide wears out, the environment has changed to where that disease is no longer an issue. And so, if it appears as though you sprayed a fungicide in June and that gave you gray leaf spot control season long, that's really not the case. The fungicide gave you gray leaf spot protection for 2 to 3 weeks. And then after that, the gray leaf spot didn't come back. So it's, you might say that's kind of semantics that, well, I used it and I didn't have gray leaf spots. So what do you mean it didn't give me season long control? But, those products are not going to hang around for 3 months in your field. If they did, we could never get them registered. So that would technically not be a good thing if those products hung around that long. But Adam's right. There are newer products that are promoting an earlier application window. We do a lot of things for convenience that aren't necessarily better, but we still like them because they're convenient. And having more windows to apply fungicide to spread the workload, that's not a bad thing. But I'm not exactly sure that we're ever going to get as big of a benefit out of applying those fungicides on small corn as we do on big corn. That's one of the benefits of short corn someday is that short corn, even when it's big, not that big. So it makes it easier to get across those fields with traditional equipment, and will open up a lot more of those fungicide timings to us without having specialized equipment.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty excited about short corn. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do in-season additions, applications, all kinds of great things associated with short corn. I just want to give everybody the just under 10-minute warning here to try and get your questions in. Our next live event is on June 3rd. And be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Check out, subscribe to our YouTube page. Obviously, if you're on here now, hit that like button if you like this, and be sure to hit the little bell icon so you get a notification pop up on your phone or iPad, whatever it may be, whenever we're doing some more live Ask the Agronomist, or when we post some new content to our YouTube page about all kinds of different agronomic issues that may be happening at the time.
I'll also mention, related to that, the old episodes of Ask the Agronomist are there as well on the YouTube channel. So if you maybe missed one, or you're joining for the first time and you want to look back at some of those old episodes, they're there as well. That also reminds me, I need to give a shout out to our host. We're here at Yetter's training facility on the north edge of Macomb. Really appreciate these guys letting us borrow their internet and borrow their erase board and borrow their classroom every other week for Ask the Agronomist. So thanks again to Yetter Manufacturing for that.
I think we might go ahead and try to wrap it up. The only other thing I wanted to touch or have you expand on just a little bit with the fungicide conversation is we talked a lot about corn. Corn obviously this year seems to be in conversation, probably more so than it has been in the past. We got good commodity prices at the moment, so it doesn't take much of a yield benefit to pay for a lot of different things, fungicide included. But what are you thinking on soybean, Lance? What's your favorite time to put your fungicide on your soybean? And what's new in the soybean fungicide world that you're aware of?
Yeah, so I think it's fun. I joke about this a lot, and I kind of wish over the course of my career I would have kept a spreadsheet on this, because it feels like I meet growers who are very, very strong believers in fungicide on corn. I meet growers who are very, very strong believers in fungicide on soybeans. And in a lot of cases, the guy that believes in it in corn doesn't think it pays in beans. And the guy that's convinced it pays in beans doesn't think it pays in corn. And then there's another group that's highly convinced that it pays, in both crops, and I'm just doing every acre. And then there's a group that, thinks that somebody's just trying to sell something to them and it doesn't really pay in either crop. And it feels like there's about equal percentages of those four categories of farmers out there. So we've really never gotten a consensus amongst a majority of farmers that fungicides are a good thing for both crops. But that's my belief. I generally, unless a field has just been messed up beyond repair, all of my acres are going to get fungicide every year on my operation. So when we're talking soybeans, the sweet spot window, traditionally is R2 to R4, with R3 being the center of the sweet spot. So I'm generally shooting for an R3 application. Big believer in having insecticide, in that trip. You could probably make the same argument in corn, although it's a lot less common to have insecticide along for the ride in a corn application, but that's an area that probably ought to be explored more. But soybeans, it's a no-brainer. There are scenarios where I think we get a bigger yield bump out of the insecticide than we do from the fungicide. And having the two of them together is going to greatly increase your odds of having a positive response. If you're going after white mold, you're going to want to use a product like a Delaro Complete that has good activity on white mold, and it's going to need to go out earlier. So if you're going to target white mold, the sweet spot's not R3, the sweet spot's probably late R1, because the decaying flowers, the blossoms, is how the sclerotinia infects into that plant, and that's the entry point for the disease. So that fungicide application needs to go out earlier. There are scenarios where, if you've got, say, some late frog eye that shows up, or in many cases, late insect feeding that occurs, that an application later than R3 could be a benefit to you. So just like in corn, it is impossible to protect that soybean plant season long with one timing of fungicide. If you're going to do it once, I'd say R3. If you're worried about white mold, I would encourage a late R1 followed by maybe an R4, because the challenge with going after white mold at R1, that's great. That's when you need to do it for white mold, and you need to be using a product that has activity on white mold, but you're going to miss out on some of the benefits that you get from that R3 application if you put it out at R1. So if you're really serious about targeting white mold, you might want to think about two applications of fungicide. And the other thing I like to remind folks is, with the stink bug pressure we have, the late generations of bean leaf beetle we have, grasshoppers in some cases, I think there are probably a lot of fields of soybeans that would benefit from an insecticide application later than R3. And I'm not going to tell you to delay your R3 to R5, because that's not the way to go. Go ahead and make that R3 application fungicide with insecticide. But then later in the season, if you're seeing lots of stink bugs, if you're finding lots of signs of insect feeding, there may be scenarios where a sequential insecticide application would actually have a lot of value, especially if you're a seed grower, if you're trying to raise, high quality soybean seed. Later applications might be a benefit. But I agree with you, Adam. I think with today's commodity prices, I think there's going to be more interest in experimenting and using fungicides. And so if you historically haven't used fungicides, might be a good year to try them. If you've been using fungicides, maybe it's a year to try one of the newer products like a Delaro Complete that has a really, really strong benefits and weed control or disease control and residual activity. And maybe it's a year to upgrade your fungicide, or maybe it's a year to experiment with multiple applications. I have an idea on my farm in soybeans. I'm going to try some early kind of an early fungicide application, probably along with some foliar fertilizer products, and I'm going to put my volunteer corn control product in with that pass. That's going to go out after I've made my herbicide applications, but before my R3, R4 pass. So I'm actually going to make another post-emergence pass. I'm going to have tram lines in my 15-inch row soybeans by the time I get done spraying them. But I'm going to have my early post pass, which is going to be my main herbicide pass with my dicamba, my additional overlapping residual, some glyphosate. Then I'll have kind of a mid-post pass, which if I've got some late grass escapes, velvet leaf, cocklebur, some of that stuff that Roundup could clean up, I might have additional glyphosate with that mid-post application. Probably be too late for dicamba at that point in time. I don't think I'll need dicamba at that point in time. If you're using XtendFlex technology, you might have an opportunity to throw Liberty in with that pass if you need to. But that's primarily going to be my early fungicide and my micronutrient pass. And then I might delay my R3 till, maybe like R3 point something or closer to R4 for my, my full shot fungicide, my mainstay fungicide application with a good insecticide with that trip. And that's going to kind of be my, play around, see what I can make a field of beans yield fungicide program for soybeans. So with that, if we haven't any other late questions come in just under the wire, Adam shaking his head no. So we'll call that a wrap for this episode of Ask the Agronomist. So appreciate you being here with us this morning. Again, if you enjoyed it, come back in 2 weeks. We'll do it again. And appreciate all the questions, and hopefully we can get dried out and get back in the field long before we're back together again in 2 weeks.